Rich Wolf had a good idea. A lot of people have asked, since we don't do so many tours anymore, why are we asking you to do this? And he thought of two good reasons, and you could stand up and tell us what they were, if you're right there. Rich? Yeah, go on.
First of all, it's a quick way for an experienced docent to give you an overall view of the museum in 2 hours. Secondly, it's a good way to test you on your knowledge, generally speaking, of the museum and our various ships. Because, as I pointed out to my group on Sunday, this class is a fire hose. You're getting a lot of information in depth. Boom. Okay? The next 6 months after you graduate and get your blue shirts is really where you're going to acquire a lot of the knowledge from watching other docents do it, okay, on how to present it and tell the story that we want to tell to our visitors.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So,
I'd have to echo that. That's a very good approach. And also, the situation is that as we do the shadow tours, if we show you every ship, we're giving you like a 5-minute, what I call elevator speech. Well, guess what? That would be what you would do for a deck watch. Someone just walk in and say, oh, I'm gonna work on the Dolphin or whatever. They're gonna walk down there and you can give them the 5-minute elevator speech of what it is and send them on their way. So, okay.
yes,
There is a shadow tour this Thursday at 9 o'clock, is that
Yes, that's still on.
okay? And now there's one at 10 o'clock
Yes.
on Thursday?
So I'll talk real fast and that way you can do the one in front.
Yeah.
all right.
When was the one on Saturday?
What time was the one on Saturday? There was one at 9 and there was one at 11:30.
And then there are two on Thursday as well.
Right.
And there's two on Thursday as well.
Right. Maybe you want to post that to everybody.
All right. There was a question as to whether trainees could go on a sale, Saturday sale on the Californian. Rebecca checked and got us approved, but only for those that have been attending the classes regularly. So that probably includes everybody here. So if you wish to coordinate and go on one of the sales on the Californian on Saturday from noon till 4, then you need to communicate with Ken Golden. And Ken, are you here?
He's here.
Ken?
Yes.
Uh,
I will
Do you have
send
any
you-
further instructions?
I'm waiting to get final approval of the list
So,
from Rebecca.
yeah, how many of our newbies are interested in training on Californian? So for right now, we're only gonna have Californian until we can sail San Salvador again, which is hopefully by May, we hope. So I'm gonna send Ken the list, and he'll have your email address and your phone number. Anybody have a problem with that? Then I have to get approval from operations to add a body, depending on what our ticket sales are. So it's a little complicated, but we'll try and get you on.
After I get that list, I will send a group email to that.
Who's that?
So you'll get an email from me, and then you can let me know your interest.
All right. Any other last minute items? I see a hand in the back.
So much for starting early.
Hat savers, people wear baseball hats when they sail, to avoid.
Losing your hat overboard.
They're on the bar, you just pick one up.
Thank you.
Thank you, very kind. All right, Bob?
Like this string
Bob's got a
hold it
little
down.
longer presentation today, so that's why we started early.
Well, so much for starting early. But that's okay. So I'll apologize in advance if I go a little bit long, but if you think about it, I'm actually going to be talking about 100 years worth of history of the Star of India. So I think it's going to take a little bit longer than our allotted 45, 50 minutes. But before I start, I wanted to show you some source material that we use. And the first one being the Docent Training Manual, which you guys have all seen right now. There's lots of things about the Euterpe/Star of India in that. But the thing that I used probably the most on this talk was this book by Jerry McMullen called The Star of India. This is in the bookshop. You can purchase this for, I think it's $24.95. They have copies. You can actually get a copy from the library and borrow it if you need to. But I find that this is like the Bible of talking about Euterpe and Star of India. And then we have the Mainsail Hall from winter, spring of 2013, where we're commemorating the 150th anniversary. And in here is a large number of stories related to the Euterpe and the Star of India through its various eras. Great photos in there. You can purchase this in the bookshop for a low price of $4.95, but you also can get a discount because you're a member. All right? Yes, sir.
I just want to remind folks that that first document you showed us, the training manual, is a very handy thing to have a hard copy of, but all of that material is also available on the Docent page under the link for the Docent training manual. It's the same thing.
Right.
Handy to have a hard copy, but it's all there on the website.
Correct. The last thing that I used as a resource for this is on our website, if you link onto the library, one of the things on there is called the Hub, and it actually is a lot of the photos and artifacts we have that are digitized, and you can actually download them and take a look at them. Some of them are searchable, where you can actually just put in something and you can do a fuzzy search on it and figure out where it is. But it's really good and fun thing to just kind of peruse all 2,000 of those photos to do that. So that's kind of how I set up this talk. All right. So what I want to talk about right now is that there was a momentous event happened during the San Diego's July 4th, 1976 bicentennial celebration. An event that many people thought was impossible and would never happen. Due to the earnest effort by dedicated people, the Star of India put to sea for the first of many glorious sails off San Diego. She was 113 years old. Only a half dozen of her crew of 40 volunteers ever sailed in a square rig before. But with the help of trained crew from other tall ships, the exercise came off without a hitch. From the shoreline, hillsides, and 1,000 yachts, San Diego turned out en masse to witness this momentous event. This is her story. This is a story of survival and luck and dedication. It is a story of people of vision and with love of ships that did not want history or the lore of tall ships to die. It is a story of people that kept the dream alive, sometimes by any means possible, during one of the most tumultuous times in United States history. She survived Prohibition, the Great Depression, World War II, and the United States recovery from that devastating war. It is a story of the people that had the desire and the courage to give the old girl a break and restore her to her functional past. The Star of India became the cornerstone of what we now know as one of the best maritime museums in the world. Lastly, it's a story of the people and the community of San Diego who joined in the effort, making the Star of India and the Maritime Museum part of America's finest city. But the story starts at the beginning. Now, Dave and Ian last week gave some tremendous talks about the early years of the Euterpe and the Star of India. They covered the four basic eras that they had, such as the India trade, the immigrant trade, the Pacific lumber trade, and of course the Alaska Packers Association. So I just wanted to summarize one or two points on that and to move along. So basically, in between 1863 and 1923, the Star of India, Euterpe / Star of India had a very hard life. Here are two photos of the Euterpe / Star of India. The left-hand photo was taken at Port Chalmers, New Zealand, about 1888, We know it's about that because that was the color scheme that it had at that time. And the right-hand side is from about 1920 during the Alaska Packers era. And you can tell here, it's a pretty well worn out ship. If you read the logs of the voyages, regardless of the era, the story is the same. Things happened. It was a tough life, and this was not a pleasure cruise. You didn't get the all-inclusive drink package when you joined on this. But what you experienced was collisions and fires, mutiny, storm damage, injury, sickness, death, going aground, marine technologies. The list is endless. In addition, when she was sold from one owner to another, permission changed, and usually the construction of the ship changed to match that mission. One of the biggest and most significant ones to be in there was the modifications made by the Alaska Packers, both in the rig and on the deck. All right. So here's a model of the tween decks, and Ian, I forgot if you had shown this to the people in the walk around or not. I did. But if you have a chance, go down at the tween decks, because this is how it looked during the Alaska Packers Association construction. And what you have here is, let me get this little pointer here, is it was converted, of course, to the bark. We've talked about that a lot. And the poop deck and the saloon were extended almost to the main mast. That was to accommodate additional berthing for the Alaska Packers, fishermen and sailors, etc. And a couple other things to show you here is this lifeboat, which is right here, is no longer on the ship, because that is where the entryway is to get on the ship. But you can actually see the davits on both sides of the entryway and the gangway as you come in on that. And then the last thing I want to show you here is this little smokestack here, and actually I'm going to go zoom up on it a little bit, and that is one of the things that the Alaska Packers Association did is they added something called a donkey engine. It was basically a steam-powered engine, usually a train and direct drive, to do things that the sailors would normally do. That way they didn't have to have a large crew. And the way this would work, let me zoom up on here a little bit. Here's the smokestack, and so the actual donkey engine would be below it in what we now know as the sailmaker's cabin. And it would go via a chain drive all the way to the anchor capstan. And it was a lucky thing that these things were still functional because it would be impossible for a small crew to raise the anchor without them. And then, let me get this out here, and then here's an example of a donkey engine. Here. And basically this is just a steam-powered engine to run that chain drive, and actually on the other side they actually had a winch to do that. There was one comment, if you look at the Alaska Packers Association video that we have on the website, it talked about that it was a good thing that they had a donkey engine, because when they left San Francisco, most of the sailors were drunk, and they really needed to have that additional help to get out of there. All right. So August 23rd, Star of India returns from Bristol Bay for the last time. As Ian was talking about, they unloaded 20,300 cases of salmon at the APA warehouse. They discharged the crew, and the ship was towed to Alameda to be retired. Now, why did ships like the Star of India were retired? Was a number of things. In 1923, they had a lack of sailors / fishermen who knew how to sail the thing. They also, the cost of maintenance for it was starting to exceed what they could do, and they could get other ships, usually self-propelled freighters and stuff, to do what the Star of India was doing. In fact, one of the very last trips that it took, they were late leaving San Francisco because they didn't have enough crew to sail it up there. In fact, it was towed most of the way up by a steam tug, and it was only arrived in May and was late arriving. So you can see that they're looking at the economics of these things and saying, let's retire these and let's get some old but more advantageous steam-powered freighters to supplant that. So most of these ships were cut up for scrap, scuttled, or converted to massless storage hulks. So if you look at the our Docent training manual on page 49, what you'll see is a listing of all this Alaska Packer Association vessels and what happened to them. And most of them, it's not a good story. The only one that was an exception for this was the Star of Alaska, well, plus of course the Star of India. The Star of Alaska, from the standpoint of it was converted to, it was renamed the Pacific, Pacific Queen, and then eventually then it was purchased by what is now known as the San Francisco Maritime Museum, and was refurbished in the early 1950s and was renamed the Balclutha, which was its original name. So if you ever go to San Francisco, it's a dockside attraction there. It doesn't actually go sailing. But the people who did that reconstruction actually come into our story. But it's a little bit later in their storyline here. Okay. So in 1925, there was a fantastic San Diego scheme. There was a meeting of 5 people at the San Diego Yacht Club about a news of an article about the Benjamin F. Packard. Now, the Benjamin F. Packard was on the East Coast in New York. It was an old sky sail sailor. It's a wooden-hulled ship. And the article related to the point that it was about ready to be hauled out and burnt so that they could sift through the ashes and collect up all those scrap metal from that. I mean, that's as far as these things had sunk in value. Instead, it was purchased by a group of interested people, and they developed a dockside attraction. It was part of an amusement park right there in New York. And so the point here was that if New York can do it, why not San Diego? So they all got together and they said, yeah, we can do this. So just want to show you a few things on the ship itself. And actually David Clark's going to talk a little bit about this more in detail, but here is the Benjamin Packard. And if you look at the stack here, you have the mainsail, you have the lower topsail, the upper topsail, the topgallant or to'gansel, the royal, and you notice here he has one extra sail above that the Star of India does not have. That's called a skysail, and that's why this was called a skysail ship. Now, a little trivia, and that is some of these ships actually had a sail above that. And anybody want to tell me what the name of that sail was? Moonraker. So if you ever see the titles of all those books and movies and things like that, that's what they meant with that. So here is the Aquarium Committee of the Zoological Society that was formed. And the founder of that was Dr. Harry Wegeforth, who was the founder and president of the San Diego Zoo. Also James McMullen, who was the editor of the San Diego Union. And then Jerry McMullen, which was his son, who became a newspaperman, historian, and the future president of the Maritime Museum. And he was really a dedicated mover and shaker in the initial days of the Star of India. And of course, he was the guy who wrote this book here. So that's kind of almost like our Bible when it comes to things like this. To get a broader appeal to people, to the public, they said, well, we're going to make this as a combined maritime museum and an aquarium. And it's like, are they going to put fish tanks on the Star of India? And the answer was no, they were just looking at having a building. And so here, let me just back up here. This is a picture of Jerry McMullen on Butcher Boy, which is actually in our collection now. It's actually at the build site right now, and hopefully it'll be back on display. But here is a copy of a bulletin from 1929 Zoo News. showing this is what they were proposing to do. And you can see here that the Star of India here is actually in a landlocked moat. It was not planning on being to go sailing. And then down here, they actually had the aquarium with the fish tanks and things like that. So it really wasn't where they were actually going to be on the Star of India. They just thought that would be a good way to make a broader appeal into San Diego, because they were going to need money to make this thing happen. So the very first part they did is said, well, let's go into San Francisco. We heard there was a number of ships there, and let's go ahead and see if we can find something. And the Alaska Packers Association ships were available, but going fast. So they found a few candidates. One was the Star of France, which is an iron-hulled ship at $12,000. The Star of India, another iron ship, at $9,000. And the Santa Clara, which was wood, at $7,500. And they decided to select the Star of India because the Santa Clara, being wood, they did not believe it was going to survive in the semi-tropical environment that we'd have here with shipworms and things like that. So now they decided, okay, now we have decided on a ship, where do we get $9,000, right? So the committee knew that the donation from local citizens would be needed to raise the money. Who to contact? It was decided that Sonny Jim Coffroth would be a start because he could make initial contacts with other interested San Diego groups. James McMullen knew him from San Francisco and was designated to be the first contact. So James Coffroth, or also known as Sonny Jim, ponied up the money. He was known to millions of sports fans. He was the founder of the Agua Caliente racetrack in Tijuana and promoter of history-making prize fights. He was also known as a colorful philanthropist. And so James McMullen met him at his office, and after a little small talk, got down to brass tacks. James McMullen explained the committee's plans, and wanted to know if Sonny Jim would help find donors. How would he, James Coffroth, go about raising $9,000? Well, Sonny Jim thought about this for a while, and he said, there's only one way I can think of. And he opened up his desk and wrote out a check for $9,000. So we have a plaque on the tween decks. If you go down the companionway stairs, it'll be on the starboard or right-hand side, and it commemorates this event. Now, $9,000 in 1926 is equivalent in purchasing power today of about $165,000. So that's making probably one of the largest donations in the history of the museum. Right. So we got, the title was transferred to San Diego Zoological Society. That was a nonprofit. But how do we get it to San Diego? In other words, here, we got a ship, we got it sold. We still got to get it from San Francisco and to San Diego. So the very first part is the initial towing quote was about $1,750, well beyond the payment tolerance of the zoo board. You have to remember the Zoological Society was trying to feed animals and using as much money as they could to do that. But there was a Captain Walter Brunick, who was an out-of-work but unlimited ticket captain, met with Dr. Wedgwood and proposed to go up to San Francisco, hire a limited crew, and find an economical way to tow the Star of India. And Dr. Wedgwood agreed to this, and what happened was that Captain Brunick went up to San Francisco, and he just found out that the Wapama, that's a very important name for you folks to remember, had towing gear and was scheduled to go to San Pedro right after the 4th of July celebration. The price was $500. So Captain B hired a cook, a donkey man, 2 seamen, and shanghaied a friend of his to become the 6th crewman. So they did all this with just 6 people, getting back to that thing about raising the anchor with the donkey, etc. He hired a couple washerwomen to kind of clean the place up, clean the ship up, and they was towed over to the San Francisco harbor side, anchored, awaiting the 4th of July celebrations. And here is a picture of the crew for here. And what I want to show you on this picture also is you look on the foreground there, you can see there's that chain drive I was telling you about. This was done actually on the forecastle deck. So this picture was taken. So that chain drive is what was driving the anchor windlass.
Which one is Jim Davis?
Come on, this is 1927.
Davis.
That's right. Yeah. The other thing I want to show you is if you look at the right-hand side, rightmost crew member, right over his head is a ship, and that's actually a replica of a Vikings ship. And that was actually put aboard. Dr. Wegeforth, when he went there, says, "Oh, I like that. Can we have that too?" And the Alaska Packer said, "Sure, take it." So that's what they did, and it was known as the problem child. And the reason being, it was too large to stay up on the deck. But if they launched it, it would actually probably in San Diego would probably be damaged, and so they didn't really know what to do with it. So what they did was they actually took it off and towed it and up to Balboa Park, and sure enough, sometime the next year, it got burnt down to down, and no one was very, very upset about that whole thing. Okay, let's get out of here.
What was the name of the tug?
Wapama.
Wapama.
Yeah, it was a steam schooner, and just happened to have a cable and reel on the back so that it could tow things.
Yeah, is it still in Sausalito?
Yeah. It's actually Wapama has been being recovered or restored by the San Francisco Maritime Museum. All right, so let's go to the next thing here. All right, so the Star of India comes to San Diego. So the steam schooner, as we said, tows the Star of India to San Pedro. So it weighs anchor, and it gets down to San Pedro. It anchors again. And this is where it kind of comes interesting, because the San Pedro Port Admiral arranges for the U.S. Tern, which is a minesweeper from World War I, to tow the Star of India all the way to San Diego. So Captain Brunick laid off a few of his crew, but he says, "I need a volunteer crew to come from San Diego urgently to come here and help us get this ship down to San Diego." And so the Navy actually flew them on a seaplane to San Pedro to do that. So on July 9th, 1927, the Star of India arrives in San Diego. It anchors off on North Island, and then the next day, using the last steam of its leaky donkey engine, weighs anchor for the last time. She is towed to Broadway Pier. And on August 27th, 1927, Star of India opens for visitors. The price was 10 cents. Here's a couple pictures. Here is our volunteer crew that came. Right? The guy in the white shirt next to the captain, that is Jerry McMullen. And the guy who is on the far left, was the first mate. And every time I see this, I go, "Would you get your foot off of my bench?" I actually renovated that a couple of years ago. It wasn't the very first time, but it's like, yeah, that's why we have such problems with that. Okay. And so here is the Star of India at the Broadway Pier. And now we get to the point where it's like, it's always good to ask for forgiveness instead of permission. Part one is that Port Admiral, who arranged for the USS Tern to bring it down to San Diego, got in some real hot water because the Navy regulations prohibit the Navy to compete with commercial vessels. And the commercial vessels complained that they didn't get the work. But the Admiral really didn't care because he was very close to retirement. So he could do anything he wanted, right? The second part of this asking for forgiveness instead of permission was the bill came into the Zoological Society for the towing of $500. And Dr. Wegeforth really had not gotten approval to do this from the board. So they paid it reluctantly, but they also informed Dr. Wegeforth that if he does this, the next time he does this, he should, something like this, he should consider it a personal donation. They weren't going to do this. But actually the real problem here is that money woes continued. To cover the towing costs, the zoo wanted to be recouped for that. They sold the sails to a contractor for $600. And that was, the contractor was using it to cover all kinds of things, cover the supply, his equipment and supplies. But here's the interesting thing is, just before they took all the sails off, they purloined, I won't say who did it, 2 of the sails. One of them was a jib that turns out was one of the original jibs, and it had the logo of the Isle of Man on it, and a topsail, which was a US made sail. We still have those somewhere in our archives. Actually, I think I came across them in Kevin's stuff, and so one of these days I'll see if we can pull those out and see if that really is them. I talked to Jim Davis about it, and he says they are definitely the old muslin sails, and they are completely, had a lot of water damage on them, and we have no idea what condition they are, but it'd be nice to see if we can at least see that logo on there. Yes?
For any naval history aficionados, the USS Tern, she's actually pretty well known. She's one of the few U.S. ships at Pearl Harbor to actually get a confirmed kill on a Japanese plane. So she did see some pretty distinguished service after her Star of India incident.
Yeah, I don't know if you all heard that, but it was actually active. Can you say it a little bit louder there, Michael?
Stand up. Absolutely. USS Tern, for anyone who's interested in naval history, she was at Pearl Harbor. She saw some pretty distinguished service. She's one of the few U.S. ships or that attacked to actually have a confirmed kill on a Japanese aircraft with her brace and Lewis guns. So she did see some pretty interesting action following her Star of India incident.
See, that's why it's nice to have docents a variety of experiences, because you wouldn't be surprised what the collective knowledge of what we have here. Right. So, backed up one other thing to talk about here. So the other problem they ran into with money was that the ship was basically an empty hulk, and what the problem they had was that they really didn't have any artifacts, or it wasn't really a museum. It was just an empty ship where you could walk on and go look for it for 10 cents. So what they did is they actually found that there was dry rot underneath that leaky donkey engine, and a maritime scrap company said, we'll take it and we'll trade it for some artifacts that you can put in and make your museum. And so that's what they did. And actually, here is a picture of what the museum looked like at that point. And that is, I think what we're looking at here is, this is the entry into the extended part of the saloon from the Alaska Packers. This is before they did the restoration. And I know that because if you look through that bulkhead, let me zoom up on it a little bit. I'm losing my. If you look here, you can see there is the bulk, past that bulkhead is the original cabins of the thing. So that's what I'm thinking of, is this would basically be going in towards the saloon area. This area, which is no longer there, was where they would have all the artifacts and stuff like that. Okay, so now we're talking about the 1927 Depression years. Revenue sometimes covered overhead, sometimes not. There was no money for renovation. This was a big problem all the way through into the 50s. There was caretakers that were good, some bad, and there were some infamous ones. The story that was created that David shared with us about the pirates and the slaves and the convicts, etc., we believe came from one of those first caretakers, because he wanted to hype up the ship and bring in people, because that was the only revenue they had on the thing. The other thing that they did is they had this great idea, and I call this like the Mickey Rooney movie thing, where they say, hey, I have an idea for money, let's put on a show. Yeah. Well, they did that. They had an amateur group come in, and they did the show, Gilbert and Silver, HMS Pinafore. And to do that, they moved the ship down to the B Street Pier, where they had a grandstand. And they got some lights, and they did the they did the operetta, and they noticed that when they looked at the grandstand, there was a lot more people in the grandstands than they paid for, there was tickets paid for. And what they found is they didn't do a very good job of crowd control, and people could go around the grandstands and actually get onto the grandstands without having to pay. So when they added up the revenue versus the expenses, the entire thing netted $4.85. Right. After that time, basically where it was staying there, the Broadway and the Embarcadero and the B Street was needed for something else. So the ship was moved down to the South Front Street to further reduce traffic. Because you have to remember that in the mid-30s, South Front Street is kind of where Seaport Village is right now. And that was a dirt road and hardly any lighting, etc. So you can imagine what that did to the attendance for the ship. And one of the things that happened in 1937 is the Marine Research Society, or MRS, was formed. It had a group of 40 people that were trying to actually beg, borrow, steal, do anything they could to get some cordage and some paint and do some maintenance with some volunteers. And the reason it was called, they had 40, is that's about how many people they could fit into the saloon. So limited to that. But they got known as the 40 Thieves, because they would just go around and steal whatever they could to make things happen. The very last thing that I want to talk about here on the good, bad, and indifferent was the Star of India was almost rated as a ship of ill repute. And I'm going to paraphrase the storyline here, but Jerry McMullen was the police reporter and was in the press room of the police station when the sergeant of the vice squad came to visit. Jerry, you got anything to do with the Star of India? Yes. Do you ever go down to the ship at night? No. Why? Is there anything going wrong? Is anything wrong? I gotta get I'm losing my mouse here.
Don't keep us waiting.
Yeah, I know. But there's more.
But wait.
No. Well, is there anything wrong? Well, every taxi cab driver knows the location. There's entertainment of a sort going on. It involves young ladies, if you want to call them that. And I don't want to raid the ship because it'll give it a bad reputation, but we've been getting complaints. You got 3 days. That night, Jerry McMullen went down to the Star, removed the caretaker, and removed the entertainment problem. All right. Now we can talk about some of the good caretakers that we had here. In 1939, caretaker Ed Fox lives aboard until his death in 1955. His niece joins him in 1941, and she lives aboard the ship until 1959. Let me see if I can zoom up on this for you.
Do you know what area they would have lived in?
Probably in the saloon area. That's where the cabins were. The Sea Scouts had renovated a couple of those cabins, so that's probably where they did it. The caption of this says, as the poverty and Irish penance increased, Grace Hoff, the one-man crew, became a past mistress of improvisation. And actually there was a plaque commemorating her, and the plaque reads, in memory of Grace Hoff, an affectionate tribute to a dedicated woman who for 18 years lived aboard the ship, and for 6 years was the skipper. And this was donated by the Star and Crescent Boat Company, which has now been renamed as the Flagship Cruises. So this guy's over there.
Where's this plaque now?
I don't know. We should ask Kevin. Okay. All right. So the 1941 to 1944 is the war years. And there was a proposal to cut the Star of India up for scrap metal to support the war effort. And a surveyor was assigned from San Pedro to come down and do an assessment. And he basically said the ship is mostly rust. It's not worth the effort to actually scrap it. But that surveyor happened to be a member of the MRS, the Marine Research Society, and later admitted that he overstated the estimate, right? Right? In fact, he had one of the other members of the MRS said to the surveyor, I guess it's all off for the old girl now. We didn't realize that she was that far gone. And the survivor whispered, "Shut up, you idiot. She's as fit as a fiddle. Just sit tight until the war's over. Someday, people with a little sense will do the right thing by her, and you've got a gem here in that old Hulk."
Do you have a name of the surveyor?
I don't know it, but I'm pretty sure that someone does.
Yeah, because he,
Yeah.
really, he saved the
Yeah.
star.
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
real important part of history.
Well, and that brings up there are so many lucky breaks that this ship had over its time. Even having the donkey engine that worked so they could get it out of San Francisco. Very
I
last.
think if you'd asked him his name at that time, he probably would have said, Bob Smith.
Yeah. Jim Davis. In 1944, the star got probably its most disfigurement at that point, and that is its top hamper, which my wife reminded me to tell you people what we meant by that is the upper masts and yards, is considered the top hamper, was removed by the Navy as a hazard to seaplane training with a promise to replace it after the war. So the top mast and yards were removed. Then the plan was to remove and dispose them. But the Navy, when they came in, only did half of that. They removed them, but they did not dispose of them. So all they did was they actually cut them away with a settling torch and actually let them fold over, which was actually a good thing because the caretaker, Ed Fox, was able to take all of the rigging and label it and stow it so that it could be used later on in the restoration as a prototype. So again, another lucky thing happening to the Star of India. All right, so here's a picture of it showing what it looked like actually after the slow decline. Again, you got to remember that even after the war, there was no money to actually do any renovation. The ship became basically an eyesore. They're talking about maybe we should just go get it out, take it out, sink it, or maybe they have the Navy do target practice with it or whatever. And now we come into one of these amazing saviors, again, another lucky thing, and that is in 1957, Captain Alan Villars visited the Star of India. Now, Captain Alan Villars is a very well-known author and tall ship sailor. The very last thing he did prior to this was actually sail the Mayflower II from England over to the United States. And he was going around the country giving lectures and showing the pictures of it, etc. So he was in San Diego. And so Jim McMullen and one of the other people, I think Jim Mills, went and talked to him and said, "Would you come down and take a look at the Star of India?" And they actually brought a photographer and a reporter from the newspaper. And they brought him down here. Grace Hoff made sure he paid his 50-cent admission to get in, and took him around, and he was very appalled, very upset. And he wrote a scathing article that actually they published on the front page of the Tribune, and it basically said, "It's a bloody mess. You guys should be embarrassed. You have a priceless vessel here. It can be repaired. It can sail again. You should always, you got to give the old girl a decent break." And that started a whole group of articles and of information. And from there, in 1958, a restoration committee was formed, and which then morphed into the San Diego Maritime Museum Association, and eventually what we have today. But I want to talk about these four people because each had an instrumental thing on the restoration. Carl Kortum here was the president, founder of the San Francisco Maritime Museum, and he had just finished the renovation of the Balclutha and as a dockside attraction in San Francisco. And he had a very good knowledge of these types of ships. The guy next to him, of course, is Jerry McMullen. We've talked about him a lot. Jack Donnelly was kind of their finance guy in this committee. And the fourth person on there on the right is John Bate. He recently became the director of the San Diego Port Authority, and his contract or his charter was to increase the cargo activity in San Diego and the tourism activity. So he had just returned back from San Francisco where he saw what they did with the Balclutha, and found out the very first year they opened, they netted $92,000. And that was enough to pay for the renovation and even some more after that. So he was very, very motivated for this whole thing to happen. So the very first thing they did is they decided, well, before we start raising money for this thing, we need to find out what we have here. So the very first question is, will the bottom fall out or will it fall in? And so what they did is Carl Croton did a review, and they agreed to go ahead and put it in dry dock. So C. Arnold Smith, who was the president of NASCO, and San Diego National Bank agreed to bankroll the haul-out cost of about $17,000, and also got some volunteer work to help with that. And then Captain McDermott, a retired captain, was assigned the project management. Now, he was a volunteer, so he didn't get paid, so I don't know how, he wasn't actually there very active at that point. But here's the interesting thing. They had to remove a lot of the ballast so they could take a look at the bilge. So it had basically 360 tons of ballast. That would be what it would have when it was at anchor. And they started removing it, and the boat got lighter and lighter and lighter. And pretty soon they noticed that it was kind of it wasn't stable because you're taking all the ballast out of it. And normally when you do these, you would actually do an incline test where you put weight on one side and then put on the other and then see how it reacts. Well, they kind of did their own impromptu. They said, okay, all you workers, go to the port side. They won't like that. Okay, now all go to the starboard side. And they would watch how fast it would recover, which wasn't very good. And they said, I think we need to put some ballast back in. So they put 35 tons of concrete blocks in the bottom of it, just so they could tow the ship. Because they had this vision of this unstable ship, they're going to hook a tow line to it, and the very first thing that's going to happen is it's going to capsize and sink right in the middle of the bay.
You have less than 20 minutes.
Okay, all right. I'm going to talk a little bit quicker here if I can. So here's a photo of in dry dock. And in 1961, the restoration continued. They finally received a check from the government for $23,000, which they really, really needed. And even more importantly, they had hired a Captain Ken Renard, who was a well-known historian, shipwright, rigger, sailmaker, artist. He kind of a jack of all trades, and he basically became the manager and one of the key people in the restoration. His attitude on the thing was, we're not just going to put some paint over the thing. We're going to make this as best as we can. And in 1963, the Star Venue was open to the public under protest by the renovation folks, but basically it was the 100th year anniversary, and so Captain Villers returned and was extremely complimentary of how this worked. So here's a picture of them with the check, and then on the other side here's this Captain Ken Renard and a young lad, and that is not Jim Davis. I talked to Jim, he knows who it is, it wasn't him. Okay, and so now we come down to the point of, now they're restoring the thing is, well, how much ballast should we put in? And Carl Croton said, well, the best thing to do is we're going to put it on steel frames elevated from the bilge so that we can actually look underneath and inspect it. So they had these huge concrete blocks, let me get this one here, which would go in. And we can actually see these today. We actually go down in the bilge and see those. But the issue that they ran into then is, at the second sail, they found out that 400 tons was not enough if you're going to sail it. And so they added additional 450 tons to give it more stability. And in fact, ironically, when David Berg was talking about that, we found that that's about how much the Euterpe started with, was about 850 tons. So I want to jump to a clip from the Iron Lady of the Seas video clip. You probably have seen this. This is also on our website. It's the one we have in the saloon. But it really shows us some of this because a picture is worth 1,000 words and a video is worth 1,000 pictures. And you get a really good feeling as to what this looks like. So hopefully I'll be able to get this.
After the 1923 season.
Is that too loud?
It ended suddenly and completely. It was just as well for the Star of India. She was 60 years old and had sailed around the world 21 times. If ships need to rest as humans do, the Star was more than ready. Alameda was a traditional resting place of ships no longer needed, vessels expected to fall apart in obscurity, for that is the way many ships die. Less fortunate were those torn apart by wreckers for scrap metal, a common fate for sailing ships fallen on hard times. More than one of the Alaska Packers' fleet sailed to Japan to be fed piece by piece into that country's steel mills. It could have been the fate of the Star of India, but it was decided to let her lay a while longer at Alameda. Few thought she would ever sail again. San Diego, California has long been an important Pacific Coast seaport. Discovered by Juan Cabrillo in 1542, it has been host to vessels ranging from tall ships to giant aircraft carriers. Here in 1925, in the warm glow of a late summer evening, one of the strangest and longest-running love affairs ever to develop between men and ships, and there have been many, began. In a local yacht club, Jerry McMullen, later to become a renowned Pacific Coast maritime historian, and 4 friends were discussing the plight of the old ships. The feasibility of saving at least one for future generations was discussed. There were no public funds available, yet as the new idea grew, these enthusiasts became determined to save one of the rusting ships of the Packer Star fleet. Soon, with a little coaxing from McMullen's father, a personal check for $9,000, the total sum needed to buy the Star of India, was received from Sonny Jim Coughlin, a flamboyant racetrack operator and fight promoter, and one of San Diego's most colorful philanthropists. It was her last chance for a new life, and this life would be as hazardous and trying as any she had faced. As the Star of India was towed out under the Golden Gate for the last time in July of 1927, her small crew was filled with hope and expectation of her rebirth. But in San Diego, the money needed to carry on the work of restoration came in slowly. Perhaps it was just as well, as the tasks were endless. The lack of money slowed the work, and it often dragged. It seemed to the hard-worked volunteers that more was lost in neglect than was gained in intermittent work. She wasted away bit by bit for more than 30 years, through a depression, a world war, and well into the 1950s. Devotion and love, and there was plenty of that, were not enough to restore the Star. She barely escaped the threat of being sold for scrap to the wreckers or towed out to sea for the Navy's target practice. As the years went by, her condition became at first bad, then worse, and soon dreadful. She was badly mutilated when the Navy cut away her topmasts, a hazard to low-flying aircraft. It was said she was a pitiful sight, her paint peeling, the seams in her deck cracked and gaping. Feeble attempts at patchwork were everywhere about her decks and aloft. Few things functioned anymore. Not her wheel, her pumps, nor her capstan. She had suffered greater damage lying in repose than the seas had inflicted upon her, and it seemed that her end was very near. Criticism of her condition started to be heard, but it was not enough to capture wide concern. Then, in 1957, Captain Alan Villers, an Australian seafarer and noted authority on sailing ships who was visiting in San Diego, saw the Star of India at her worst and protested publicly, vehemently in print. Outraged by her shabbiness, he called upon the city's conscience by reminding her citizens of San Diego's maritime heritage and their obligation to preserve some vestige of it. He reminded them that they had the Star of India in their own backyard, dying of neglect. His call to arms found supporters, and new resolve grew to replace yesterday's civic indifference. San Diego would try once more to properly restore and preserve the Star of India. It seems she had weathered yet another storm. But first, the vessel would have to be hauled into a dry dock and inspected to see that there was something left of her hull worth saving. After chipping away a thick layer of sea life and corrosion, the heavy iron belts forged by Manxmen over 96 years before tested strong and sound. She would endure. Now restoration could be finished, but it would take work. Thousands and thousands of man-hours. And it would take money. No one really knew how much. The estimates appeared astronomical, but money started coming in. From doctors and lawyers, from businessmen, from Navy personnel, restaurant owners, from many corners of the community. Contractors and carpenters donated time and materials. Those few who worked alongside the bedraggled vessel steadfastly begged, borrowed, wheeled, and cajoled, even contributing their own meager funds. The money was scarce. The work had to go on. Not a day's work was lost. It was a tiny crew tackling an immense job. Captain Ken Renard, an experienced sailorman, sailmaker, and ardent marine historian, led his men into the job step by step, turning to whatever needed doing in the necessary order of priority. It was amazing to see order emerge from apparent chaos. The multitude of tasks seemed impossible. There was so much to get done and made shipshape. Still, there were many in San Diego who doubted it could be done. Could she? Would she ever really be restored properly? The Star of India is 202 feet long, 35 feet wide, and 23.5 feet deep, with masts towering over 140 feet above the water. Every inch of her would have to be sanded, scraped, brushed, rubbed, rebuilt, or in many cases, as with her topmast gear and her rigging, replaced. The task would be more difficult and more time-consuming than even her original construction. Certainly, it would be more expensive. Yet the work moved forward. Old masts and yards were removed. Trees from Oregon's forests were cut and shaped into new masts. Miles and miles of rope were required to fashion new rigging. Old-fashioned skills were needed, and surviving craftsmen were found and pressed into service. Some of the last of the old-time ship's carpenters generously donated their time to the rebuilding and repairing of the Star's fine woodwork. Work went on day and night. Decks were repaired, fittings were replaced. From stem to stern, the Star's original beauty, the cunning grace fashioned by British shipwrights a century ago on the Isle of Man, was recreated. By her 100th birthday on November 14, 1963, she was ready for her long overdue ceremonial rechristening as the Star of India. Mrs. C.C. Woodworth, president of the Ladies' Auxiliary, was awarded this honor. To mark this reemergence into new life, the Star was officially designated a National Historical Landmark. Though the work of restoration was far from completed, an exciting new thought came to certain admirers of the Star. It was an impossible thought, of course. What if, some began to ask boldly, what if her restoration were brought to the point that she could actually sail again? Could it be done? Would it ever be done? Such questions haunted the minds of many Museum Association members and occupied the agendas of endless executive committee meetings. She would need sails and a trained crew, of course. And the restoration budget, already strained to the breaking point, could not begin to pay for the 1,000 needed details involved in her sailing. Certainly it was impossible. The Star was being restored as a museum, and museums simply do not head out to sea on a soft morning breeze. The income from the admissions paid by the thousands who visited her barely covered her day-to-day maintenance costs. Much more money was needed. Once more, the citizens of San Diego were asked to bear the cost. If the ship, their ship, was to sail out of San Diego Bay, the decision was theirs. Talk in the town turned hopeful. No longer was the idle question, can she sail again, but when will she sail again? In 1976, the United States would celebrate her 200th birthday. Tall ships from all over the world were coming to New York to celebrate the event. If ever the Star of India were to sail again, 1976 must be the year. The challenge from New York was inescapable. It was daring, yes. The whole idea of restoring the Star had been daring from the beginning. Some people said she was too valuable to risk at sea. Others said it was a crazy pipe dream. There were even those who believed that a ship over 100 years old could not possibly be seaworthy. Although many shared these views, the association committed itself to seeing the Star under sail on that special July 4th. It would take enormous effort. First, she would have to be hauled out in a dry dock, where again hundreds of pounds of sea life would be scraped from her hull. She would have to be sandblasted, tested, and painted. Her rudder needed work. A crew to sail her had to be trained, and quickly. The expenses of preparation were staggering. Once more, her friends reached for their checkbooks, and for the first time, a public fundraising drive was mounted. Yet, in the back of many minds was the nagging thought, will she make it? July 4th dawned and the Star lay ready at the wharf, her lines singled up, ready to be cast off. Over 1,000 vessels, large and small, waited to accompany her out of the bay. It was alive with well-wishers. Aboard the Star, last-minute preparations were made for casting off as soon as the tugs arrived to tow her clear. An eager crew of volunteers trained for this day gathered on the deck for their picture. After a send-off from the mayor and other dignitaries, the tugs came alongside. Mooring lines were cast off. Slowly, she swung out from the wharf, trembling as the water quickened under her keel. She was bound for Point Loma and the open Pacific beyond. First a murmur. Then a roar of enthusiasm came from the thousands of spectators lining the nearby piers and ships. Ships' whistles, including that of the museum's steam yacht Medea, roared in salute. The hopes and dreams of thousands who had given their time and money were about to be realized. Already the bay was alive with the small craft forming the welcoming fleet. Loaded with sightseers, they were a floating hazard at the same time. Picking a fair way through this cheering flotilla of onlookers could be impossible without help. But the Coast Guard led the way, clearing a path, discouraging boatloads of enthusiastic friends who were getting in her way as she was towed down the bay. In command, from his station on the poop, was Captain Carl Bowman, former skipper of the Coast Guard's famous bark Eagle, which at that very moment was leading the bicentennial parade of tall ships into New York's harbor. Slowly the decks of the Star came alive under the orders from this experienced master in steam and sail. Up forward was her devoted restorer, Captain Ken Renard, who knew she was safe and ready for the sea. At the wheel stood two old sailormen, each with years of service in sailing ships even larger than the Star. And now her sailors scrambled aloft to unfurl the heavy sails, as sailormen had done aboard her a century ago. Above, photography planes and helicopters buzzed like hornets, and on the surface, high-speed motorboats laced through the fleet, shooting thousands of feet of film. Record of this day was a necessity for the thousands of contributors who had supported the sailing. As the crew loosed more and more of her canvas, the word was passed quietly to cast off the tugs. The moment was at hand. And then, like some great seabird, ungainly at rest but awe-inspiring in flight, the bark Star of India came to grace for life, afloat and under sail again at long last. For the first time in more than half a century, she stood out to sea, powered only by the sea wind in her sails. Amid the flotilla of small craft, each crowded with expectant faces beaming with shared pride, the old ship moved slowly away from the attending tugs, her staunch iron hull lifting to the gentle Pacific ground swells. Point Loma dropped astern. She was on her own, free.
So, again, I apologize, we're gonna run a little bit late, but actually I wanted to mention one thing. Brian how do you pronounce it? Chadwell, who was one of our trainees here, I just found out, actually was a passenger on that sailing. Because Kyle Bortman was your neighbor, was it? Yeah. So maybe during the break you can regale us with all your events, but it just so happens that we, full circle here. So the story continues. The next sail after 1976 wasn't until 1984, but after that, basically there was 42 more sailings, sometimes 2 or 3 times a year. The last sail, of course, was November 23rd, her 160th birthday, which many of us were able to participate in. And the next planned sail is in October of 2027, her 100th year in San Diego. So all of us are part of the story, the continuing story of the Star of India. So the story continues. It's a story of a survivor. Of the approximately 10,000 commercial ships at sea when Euterpe was launched, the life expectancy of a ship was about 10 to 12 years. Ships were lost due to collisions, fires, mutiny, storm damage, death, going to ground, marine technology advances. The list is endless. Of the 10,000 ships, there is only one still actively sailing, the Star of India, the oldest and active sailing ship in the world. So thank you for your attention, and I'll open it up now for any questions and comments.
We'll have to take questions and answers during the break or afterwards. We're running a little late. Bob, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you. If you haven't signed in yet, the clipboard is over on the port side bar area. Let's take about a 5-minute break.
Thank you. This is going to be an overview. I'm going to be skipping lightly over a lot of things that could be discussed at length, possibly another time. But I just want to give you a kind of a 20,000-foot view of how things work with the maintenance and sail crew, which is obviously another of the volunteer groups at this museum. The way it works is people join the maintenance crew, and then from there they can take some additional training and pass some tests to also join the sail crew. Most of the people on the maintenance crew are also on the sail crew, but not all. Some folks are maintenance crew only. As docents, we learn a lot about the cultural perspectives and the history of these ships and these exhibits. The maintenance and sail crew tend to be more focused on the nuts and bolts of maintaining and sailing the ships. So they're two kind of different approaches, but they're very complementary. We have a variety of active sailing vessels at this museum. We have the Star of India, an 1863 iron bark, Californian, a 1984 locally built topsail schooner, HMS Surprise, built in 1970, which is a full-rigged wooden ship, and San Salvador, which this museum, as you are, I'm sure, aware, a galleon that this museum built.
A lot of times guests think that anything with dead eyes and lanyards on the rigging must be a pirate ship. You'll hear that a lot. People will point at San Salvador and call it a pirate ship. They'll even point at Star of India and call it a pirate ship, when it's actually, of course, a cargo hauler. Sometimes I ask people, what do you think a pirate ship is? And what I like to say to them is, a pirate ship is any ship a pirate can steal. But they want something fast that can run away from the law when it shows up. We also have the 1904 steam yacht Medea and Pilot, a 1914 wooden harbor pilot boat, which was built just up the street here at Manuel Goulart's yard. And we also have PCF 816, a 1968 aluminum vessel that was of the type used in Vietnam for working in close to shore and then going up rivers. The maintenance crew does all kinds of things to keep the vessels in operating condition. We do small jobs, and we do medium jobs, and we do large jobs. We're preserving artifacts. This photo is from the dry dock of February 2020. Our actively sailing vessels are required to be dry docked every 2 years to maintain their Coast Guard certification. Star of India, as not an inspected vessel that sails regularly with passengers buying tickets, only has to be dry docked every 10 years. And that is, of course, a huge operation to dry dock Star of India. You've heard a lot of different phrases, and you'll hear lots more. One of the phrases you hear sometimes mentioned is when you join a new organization, your first day on the job, you need to learn all kinds of things. How do I turn in a timesheet? Where's the bathroom? Where am I going to sit? There's a lot to learn. That is to say, you have to learn the ropes. These are the ropes. A great many phrases that we use in everyday language without ever really considering where they come from, we just take them for granted, come straight from sailing ships. You've heard somebody talking about being taken aback, which is to say when the wind comes from the forward side of a sail, it's not meant to have the wind on the forward side, and that can cause big problems. If you have someone who is maybe the most absolutely reliable person in your organization, you might say that they are the mainstay of your organization. Well, the mainstay is the largest forward-leading line that helps to hold up the mainmast. We hear talk about a slush fund in politics sometimes. Slush was the grease left over from cooking salt pork in the ship's coppers, and the cook had the prerogative to keep that and sell it to the crew, which could be used for, among other things, lubricating the masts. So that was kind of his personal perk. He could kind of sell that to whoever he wanted to, really. And that came to be known as a slush fund. Lots of other phrases like that. Bill Prestridge has sometimes given us a few minutes of discussion about some of these interesting nautical phrases which we have been using all our lives and never quite realized where they came from. We have the Docent page, which has a great many resources on it. There is similarly a sail crew page, which you can reach by going to sdmaritime.org/sail-crew. You're all welcome to do that. It's perfectly accessible. There's no password or anything. And it has all kinds of things on it. It's got the full Star of India sail training manual. It's got training manuals for the other ships. It's got pin diagrams. There are videos there that you'll see on the right, which are to show the crew how to tie all of the knots that they are required to learn to join the sail crew. Lots of good material there, so I encourage you to spend a little time on the sail crew page as well. It's got a lot of good stuff. Oops. Let's try that again. There we are. To join the sail crew, you need to do a physical test. Susan Berg here is demonstrating the requirement that you be able to haul a 70-pound bag of rocks hauling both vertically and horizontally. There are other tests if you want to climb, some additional qualifications if you want to be a climber. There is also a written test, which is based mainly on the Star of India Sail Training Manual. It's on that crew page that I told you about, but also has requirements for some of the material from some of the other pages that are also on that same sail crew page for the training manuals for Californian, for San Salvador, and Surprise. If this is something that interests you, we've got quite a few people here who are already on the sail crew. Could I ask for a show of hands, everybody who's currently on the sail crew right now? So if this is something you'd like to hear more about, any of these folks can fill you in on a lot of those details. We have about 120 volunteers on the maintenance and sail crew. Variable, that's not a precise number. On the sail crew, as Jim was just referring to, safety underlies everything we do. We have many highly experienced crew who are not climbers. You don't have to be a climber. You never have to climb. Even if you're a qualified climber, you never have to climb. Most of the time while we're sailing, there is no sail crew aloft. We have sail crew aloft for setting sail and dousing sail, but not most of the time when we're underway. Sometimes people ask me, is it dangerous? Yeah, it is dangerous. It absolutely is. So fear is your friend, gravity is not. And we have to be constantly mindful of that, which is why training, alertness, teamwork, and attention to detail are essential. When we go aloft, it's typically on business. We don't go up there just to admire the view, although the view is spectacular. But when we climb, it's on business. Whoa, let's not do that. Yikes. Let's go there. And that's not quite what I had in mind. Okay, yeah, that'll do. This is just a brief aside about Surprise. Unfortunately, Surprise is not currently sailing. She's quite an old wooden ship and she's in bad shape, but I just thought I'd give you a little bit of information about her. She's a 500-ton ship, and she would have had a crew of more than 200 people back in the day, because a ship like that, about 500 tons displacement, had to have enough crew to man every one of her guns at the same time and be able to maneuver all of the sail at the same time in a battle. Contrast that with Star of India, which I think the displacement is something about 1,300 tons, I think. If any of you have any better number for that, let me know. 1,300 tons versus 500 tons. Star would sail with a very small crew, something like 25, maybe 30 people. Why so few? Because ship owners don't make money by paying crew. They make money by collecting freight fees and by paying as few sailors as they can possibly get away with. So a completely different operation than a fighting ship. Yes?
How big would the sail crew be on Surprise?
No, everybody's a sailor on Surprise.
Separate, without the guns?
Everybody's a sailor on Surprise. The gunners also climb.
So 200
everybody's
to take the boat out without.
Yeah, give or take. They're not all aloft in the rig, but
Right.
but they're not broken up into you're a climber and you're not.
I think she's asking about more recent sail crew.
Well, that sounded like you were asking about back in the day.
Without guns.
Yeah, so you said
When we-
200 people total crew to
Yeah.
sail Surprise.
Well, back in the day, including gun crews, and keeping in mind that they knew perfectly well that if they go on a year-long voyage far across the ocean, they can't count on all those guys coming back.
Right.
Because disease mainly, and to some extent battle, is gonna
Attrition.
cause some attrition. But when we sailed Surprise more recently, I think we generally had a crew of, I want to say about 40-ish, something like that, give or take, just to operate the ship. Because of course we weren't firing guns and we didn't expect people to die of scurvy on a day sail, right? Yeah.
What I was telling people on the boat, on the Surprises, when you saw an enemy ship that was bigger than you in the horizon, you wanted to get all your sails up as fast as you could
Yeah.
to get the hell out of there. Or a merchant ship you wanted to capture, the same thing. So you need a lot of guys that set all the sails at the same time.
Simultaneously.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was one of the big crew.
Right, whereas Star of India, if it's sailing from across an ocean, if it takes them half a day to set sail, they don't really care. They're not a clipper ship that is a ship designed to be able to get valuable, urgent cargo across the ocean as quickly as possible. You know, they're hauling bulk cargo. So if it takes them a little extra time, but they can get away with paying fewer sailors, they're gonna wanna save some money. Very different operation. When we sail Californian, it's generally about a dozen crew. And I just like this photograph of shadows of crew climbing as reflected on Californian's staysail. I put it up there just because it's just too pretty to miss.
Back when there was a club on this day.
Yeah, that's right. This is back when we actually had a boom on the staysail. So the crew lay out onto the yards, and you all know that these horizontal spars that you see are called yards. You will sometimes hear people refer to that whole spar as a yard arm, which is just wrong. The tip ends, which on Star of India are painted white, those are the yard arms, the ends of the yard. The whole stick is a yard. Crew lays out onto the yards to set and furl sails. They'll be standing on foot ropes, which are those ropes that you see hanging underneath the yards, which are typically steel cable that's been tightly wound with twine and hard for weatherproofing, but also makes them very non-slip, which is a very good thing for the crew. Once you get aloft to your workstation, you have a safety lanyard attached to a waist harness, and you clip that into part of the rig, typically a steel bar running along the top of the yards called a jackstay. And there are other places in the rig that you can clip in, but this is the basic process of how we arrange ourselves once we get to a workstation.
Did they have those safety features back then?
No. No.
Life was cheap.
No,
That's why they had so
they
many
did not.
crew.
And in fact, well, that's right, but also, in fact, Jim Davis tells me, who, by the way, among his many other accomplishments, was actually the person who founded this museum's volunteer sail crew. He's the guy that started that. He tells me that some of the old timers told him when he was just starting out that you wouldn't want to have volunteers because they'd take your job, and you wouldn't want to have any kind of a safety harness to clip in or something because it would make people complacent and they'd get careless, and that would be dangerous. So he was told by some of the old hands that you shouldn't be worrying about having things like a climbing harness and a lanyard to clip in. We don't look at it that way anymore. Yes?
In the really old days, they didn't wear shoes because they didn't want to slip, so they went barefoot.
Yeah, I've actually climbed Surprise barefoot. If I had been walking around barefoot for years and years and years and had a lot of calluses, it might have been manageable. But for a tenderfoot who actually is accustomed to wearing shoes, that was not a pleasant experience. Yes?
A common injury was hernias.
Absolutely.
In those days when you were reaching over that and you're pulling on those huge cells.
We're gonna get there.
Hurl them in a storm.
Stand by me, we're gonna get there. These are just a few shots of what's going on here. Out sailing, you can see we got some people out here on the head rig on Star of India, and then we're gonna look at what looks like on California when we're underway. This is offshore, and it's getting a little bit sporty out there. California's a wonderful ship to sail. Fast, beautiful, amazing. Official tall ship of the state of California. Sails most weekends, or no, I guess a couple of weekends a month, I guess I should be saying, because now we've got Surprise, they tend to trade off weekends. I'm sorry, San Salvador, of course. Talk a little bit about gunnery. This is gunnery on Californian. The same kind of thing happens on San Salvador. We will fire guns as we're coming back into port. Sometimes when we're near, actually sometimes on the way out going past the Cabrillo National Monument, and other times we come in to salute Star of India as we're coming in to port. And the question would be, why would you fire a gun to salute Star of India. I mean, isn't that kind of a hostile gesture? People sometimes wonder about that. Think back 200 years, when you're off sailing into the deep blue and you come into a port, and the people in the port, they don't know you, they don't know this ship. They're wondering, is this ship here to raid the town or what? If you come across another ship at sea, you might be wondering, are they a threat? What you can do is keep in mind that these guns that they're using are muzzle-loading guns. And they have to have the muzzles of the guns protruded out through gun ports in the side of the ship in order to fire those guns. But in order to reload them, they have to pull the gun back inside the ship so they can get at the muzzle to clear it out and then reload it with the next shot. If a ship like that comes into a port and it fires all its guns, but there's no round shot, no projectiles in that gun, they're just firing blanks. But if they then do not pull the gun back inside the ship, that means you have just given the people on shore the most convincing possible proof that you have just disarmed that gun. You fired it, you didn't reload it. And that is more valuable than any number of promises could ever be, as a statement of saying, we're not here for a fight, our intentions are peaceful. And that over time has come to be morphed into being a gesture of salute. And that's the reason that we fire guns to salute. That's the purpose of it. So it's not a hostile gesture at all, quite the contrary. It's a very nice thing to alert guests when you see Californian or San Salvador coming back from a day sail and swinging in close to the Star. It's nice to alert them as you see them approaching late afternoon, usually 3:30 or thereabouts. Nice to alert the guests that you might happen to be interacting with what's going to happen. This is going to be a salute, and you want to stick around and watch this. Keep your eyes on that ship because it's going to fire a gun salute, and you're going to want to see that. People love it. They just absolutely love it. So if you're out talking with guests on a weekend afternoon when you see one of our ships coming in from a day sail, I like to just go around and kind of gather up any guests that I see in the area and say, folks, you want to come on over here? I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going to happen and what a gun salute means and where it comes from. People really like that a lot. Here's our galleon San Salvador. This is a full-size working replica of Juan Cabrillo's original San Salvador, built in 1539, came into San Diego in 1542. This replica was built starting at 2011, was launched unfinished in 2015, spent another year fitting out. We first had sea trials for her, followed by a 7-week voyage up the coast in 2016.
Where is Spanish Landing?
Oh, sorry. You know where the airport is? On the water, that's along Harbor Drive. You drive along Harbor Drive going toward Point Loma. On your left-hand side, as you're driving toward Point Loma, is a long, skinny park. It's a couple of miles long and only about 100 yards wide, if that. That's Spanish Landing. And this was done at the far western end, right by the bridge that goes over into Point Loma. The port, people say, why didn't you build it in a shipyard? And the answer is because shipyards are really expensive. And this is a nonprofit 501c3 museum. Underlined nonprofit. And the Unified Port District was kind enough to let us use a patch of land that they weren't using much. And they let us use that for about 5 years for free. It's hard to say no to free. So that's why that happened. We had over 100,000 hours of labor put into this, over half of it by volunteers. And I've heard various estimates about the actual budget. What I've heard is something like about $6 million worth of actual cash and a similar amount in donated labor and donated materials. So we've got quite an extensive community operation represented here. Yeah, something like that. That's about right. I'm going to get a little bit into details here. I'm going to be just kind of skipping lightly over some things. If you want to hear more about this, I'm very happy to talk about that. Rigging is a particular interest of mine, as some of you here can attest. It's easy to get me started talking about this, but there is no off switch. So here's Galleon San Salvador. These yards, as we've discussed, are hoisting yards. They can actually be raised all the way up, and the lower yards can be brought all the way down to lay across the rails at the deck level. That's uncommon. That's the only ship in our collection that has lower yards that can go all the way down to the rails. Most all the ships have head sails. They're jibs or staysails. Those of you who are sailors, anybody who all are accustomed to sailing boats here? So you're all familiar with jibs. San Salvador is the only boat in our collection that doesn't actually have a jib at all. It has a little square sail called a spritsail. It rides on the bow, sprit, which is where the name comes from. And it doesn't have reef points for shortening sail. It has separate little pieces of canvas that can be attached to the foot of the sails, the square sails, called bonnets. This is a ship that has square sails on the foremast and on the mainmast. On the mizzenmast, it has a sail that runs fore and aft, so parallel to the long axis of the ship. That means square on the fore, square on the main, fore and aft on the mizzen. That is what is known as a bark rig, B-A-R-K in America, or B-A-R-Q-U-E in Britain. And this is what's called a lateen sail, which is kind of an ancestor of the modern spanker sail. Just another picture of San Salvador. One of the issues in building this ship was that we have a great deal of knowledge about building and maintaining and operating 19th century sailing ships. But when we go to build a 16th century sailing ship, many things, maybe most things, are very much the same. Some things are quite different. And so the problem is that there were things that we thought we knew that were appropriate for the 19th century, not so much for the 16th century. So we had to unlearn some things in the process of doing this, which is part of the fun. Here's HMS Surprise. You'll notice something quite different here. Look at the mizzen mast. It has yards on the mizzen mast. That is to say, it's got square sails on all three masts. That makes it a ship rig. Yes?
Does everyone in this room know what a mizzen mast is?
Does everyone know what a mizzen mast is?
I don't.
Oh, sorry. What do you call the third mast on a two-masted brig? It's mizzen, sorry. I just love corny jokes. I just love corny jokes. You may have noticed. So the aftermost mast is the mizzen mast. And if we're talking about a three-masted ship, the one in the front is the foremast, the one in the middle is the mainmast, and the aftermost one is the mizzen, M-I-Z-Z-E-N, mast.
David, can you point out in this photo and the previous one why top platforms are not lookout stations?
Why they're not lookout stations? I mean, they can be.
Well, not when you've got sail set.
Oh, well, yes. So what you've got here, let me just see if I can do this. Is that right? There we go. Okay, what we're talking about now are these basket-like structures. You'll see that these masts are actually composed of 2 sticks each. There's the lower mast, which extends from the keel up to about here. And then there's a second stick, the top mast. This thing's turning on and off on me in a way I'm not familiar with. Come on. There's a second stick that extends from here up. And you can see it's skinnier than the main mast, the lower part of the mast. So this is the main lower mast, and that's the main top mast. 2 separate sticks. The overlap is called a doubling. Yes?
Is the top portion offset from the main?
Yeah, what you've got is this. You've got a main mast and then a smaller stick that's overlapped like this for the top mast. And that overlap is referred to as the doubling. If you look on Star of India, the doublings are painted white. And so it is offset to the extent that these are not stacked absolutely vertically, they're overlapped like that. Well, because it's hard to get suitable timber to make a single stick that tall. It's much easier to get sticks that are not quite that big. It also means that they're easier to handle. Rather than having one enormous thing, you have two smaller things, and it's just much more handy to deal with. And then, so this is simply overlapped and held together at the doubling. Make sense?
Definitely.
Yes, somebody else
Also
said.
heavy weather, they can take them down, the top parts,
Yes,
to reduce sail.
that is right. That's one of the aspects of being easier to handle. If you are in a storm and you are rolling severely, and you'd really like to get the center of gravity down lower so that you're not so likely to capsize and sink, you can, as Bill says, you can lower some of those upper sticks to reduce the center of gravity. Yes.
The last election, they removed the top hamper,
Yes,
start.
that's right.
Did,
Go next in the crow's nest too?
Crow's nest is a term used on whalers for looking for whales, and I'm going to skip on because we are very late here, and parking's going to run out at 1 o'clock. You had somebody else had something they wanted to say?
That's what those are called on the San Salvador.
What are called?
The basket structures.
Called tops,
Tops, okay.
because they originally were at the top of the lower mast.
Right, okay.
Adding top mast is kind of an afterthought. Surprise, there are a lot of details here. We can talk about the rig, but in the interest of time, I'm going to skip forward through a lot of this stuff. Sorry about that. Be happy to talk about it, but this is not the time. As Bob showed us a photo of Euterpe, formerly, what was the former name of Star of India. Notice here on her mizzen mast, you have yards. This is in the era before she was cut down to a bark rig. This is a full ship rig, as you can tell, because she has square sails on all three masts. She was cut down to a bark rig when she was in the Alaska Packers service because it meant that they could use a somewhat smaller crew, and it made her a little bit more nimble for getting in and out among islands in the Aleutians, which is the sort of thing she formerly did not have to worry too much about. Here she is during the Packers days, and the thing to notice here is now she's a bark rig, and also notice that she's got a spanker that is not the same as the kind of spanker we have on her now. This is called a leg of mutton spanker, and it was a distinctively West Coast thing. This is in the days when they actually had a crew of maybe 25 crew or even somewhat less. They're paying as few people as possible. Actually, it was during the restoration, Captain Ken Renard added a gaff spanker and another sail above that on the mizzen mast called a gaff topsail, and a fourth head sail, the flying jib, to balance that out. And here is Star of India with a leg of mutton spanker and a topsail called a ringtail. Ship owners are not historic preservationists. They really don't care about what the original configuration of the ship was. What they really care about is what's going to make me money. That's it. What's going to make me money and allow me to pay as few guys as I can get away with. That's their thing. These days we have a kind of a compromise rig. We've got a spanker that was not what was typically carried earlier in her career with an additional head sail. Just a couple things to keep in mind. Basic distinction in the rigging. Standing rigging are basically guy lines that keep the masts standing up. They don't have to be, those lines do not have to be flexible, which means they can be weatherproof by being coated in tar, because they don't have to run through blocks, which are what sailors call pulleys. We call them blocks. It doesn't have to be flexible to go through a block, so you just tar it, that's fine. On the other hand, things that are used to control sails have to be flexible, because you're going to be using that to pull the yards around to catch the wind to advantage and to also control the sails. So if you're looking at rigging and it's black, it's been tarred, it's almost certainly standing rigging. If it isn't tarred, it's flexible, it almost certainly is running rigging. Let's talk a little bit about, get my act together here a little bit. Okay, we'll talk about that.
You said they added the flying jib for balance?
Yes, we're going to talk about that in just a second. So just to make it a little bit easier here, we've got a picture of Star of India, and these yards are, some of them are hoisting yards. They can be raised up and down to variously set sail or reduce the center of gravity. We have some other refinements that I'm not going to get into. I'm going to leave that out. And I'm going to, yes, just get on to the next thing here. So why are these sails called square? They're not square. Why call them square? What's the point of that? The point of that is, if you look at it from overhead, you've got some sails that are running notionally parallel to the keel, to the long axis of the ship. They can be, yes, of course, they're going to be moved side to side somewhat to catch the wind to advantage, but notionally you can think of them in terms of being more or less parallel to the long axis of the ship. You have other sails that ride on these yards, which again can be pivoted around, braced as we say, to catch the wind to advantage. But again, notionally, their resting point is with the yard at right angles to the keel. That is to say, square to the keel. That's where the word square comes into it, not from the shape of the canvas. Does that make sense? I see some confusion. You good with that? That's why you square away. We sometimes get asked questions. People would say, well, now you guys, when you take this boat out, you have 2 tugboats taking you out. But that can't be right. How is that possible back in the day before you had tugs? I mean, that's not historically correct. That can't be right. But here's the thing. We're here at the Maritime Museum. The prevailing wind is coming from the west. And San Diego's a shallow bay. And big square riggers do not sail upwind very well at all. They can just barely do a little bit better than sailing perpendicular to the wind, what we would call a beam reach. Not much, they can't point toward the wind much better than that at all. So you would never bring a big square rigger like Star of India downwind in a shallow bay in an era before you had powered tugs to pull her out. They didn't. The port was over at what's called Old La Playa in the lee of Point Loma on the windward side of the bay. Now that we have steam tugs, we can get away with bringing her downwind to where she sits today and take her back out using tugs. But that didn't happen. So I was going to say, San Diego's port was on Point Loma for 100 years, from 1770 to 1870. You can actually see a historical marker to that effect if you go down Rosecrans as far as you can go before you run into the guard station for the entrance to the submarine base. And just a few feet past that guard station entrance, there is a historical marker here that explains about Old La Playa, which was the port. And if you ask very nicely at the guard booth, they may let you walk that 50 feet past their demarcation line into the base, as long as you promise not to make any fuss. If they're in a good mood, they'll let you go in and look at this if that's of interest. So Star has 10 square sails and 10 fore and aft sails. For setting sail, we are using the staysails, that is the fore and aft sails, to avoid turning. We don't set the squares when we're under tow because we would be towed with the wind hitting the sail from the wrong side. That is, we'd be, quote, quote, taken aback. Another one of those commonly used phrases. So we'll set the fore and aft sails first as we're being towed out of the main channel, and usually only set the square sails once we're outside. There's a lot of balance that goes into this, and there's a lot of teamwork. There's a command structure to deal with. We've got a captain who has the mate working for him, and mast captains. We've got one person assigned to be in charge of each of the 3 masts. And then under the mast captains, we have pin rail captains who are directing the efforts on any particular row of belaying pins. Altogether, to sail the ship, something on the order of about 60 volunteer crew, something like that. Also, this photo, you'll notice that there's a boat on strongbacks over top of the main deck. So this is out of the way, but readily available when you need it. The crew will lay aloft to put sails in their gear, and then later they'll lay aloft to furl them. But really, most of the sailing is done with the crew on deck. You lay aloft, put the sails in their gear, get them ready to be operated, and then come back down to the deck. You maybe leave 1 or 2 people up on each mast just to deal with any issues that might arise while you're sailing. And then when you're ready to douse sails, the crew go back up. Here's an example of hauling on a halyard to hoist the fore upper top yard. That's basically like lifting a large telephone pole about, 20 or 30 feet up into the air. So that's a heavy lift. It takes a big chunk of the crew operating this. And when you're sailing, trying to sail as close to the wind as you can manage, you have to keep an eye on the sails so that if they start to flutter a bit as you're getting pointed too close to the direction of the true wind, you can back off just a little bit so that you're sailing as close to the wind as you can manage, but no closer. So this is the reason, by the way, sometimes people, they say, why do you have the wheel all the way back at the stern? The reason is very simple, 2 reasons actually. The steering gear, the rudder, is all the way at the stern, and with the wheel back there, you have a very short linkage mechanically. But the other thing is the helmsman needs to be able to keep his eye on those sails, which is what the helmsman here is doing as he's sailing. He's watching out for any sign that any of those sails are just starting to wobble a little bit, which means they're losing lift, which means he needs to back off a little bit so that they're drawing full. So I want to mention a couple of things here. Oh, no, I'm not going to do that yet. I'm going to do this yet. There is another very old tradition which we very seldom employ. When a distinguished member of the museum passes away, sometimes, by no means always, we will, as we say, scandalize the yards. That is, ordinarily we keep all the yards neatly lined up parallel and square to the keel, very neatly stowed. As a symbol of mourning, very occasionally, it's very rare, we will deliberately set the yards, as they say, all ahoo, as a symbol that the ship is in mourning. This is only done dockside, by the way. You wouldn't do this at sea. And this is another photograph that I think is just too beautiful to miss. You just have to see this. So let's talk just a little bit about some forces here. I'm going to put the mic down. So I've brought the Star of India with me. This is the pocket version. And let's just talk about how this works a little bit. So for controlling this, people sometimes think that you're controlling it by using the rudder. But the rudder, if you look at the size of the rudder and the size of Star of India, the rudder is really very small in comparison to the size of the ship. If you look at a 25-foot sloop, in proportion, the rudder is much bigger. If you look at a Hobie Cat, the rudder is huge, which allows you to turn very abruptly. You can't really do that with a ship this size. Most of the steering is actually done by the choice of how you set the sails. Now you've got 10 fore and aft sails and you've got 10 square sails. So the captain has a lot of keys on that piano that you can use to adjust the way that the ship is steering and get it pointing wherever he wants it to. The goal is you would prefer not to have to use the rudder to keep pointing in the direction you want to go, because if you do that, let's say this is the ship and that's the rudder, if I'm depending on my rudder to point me where I want to go by cranking it over like this, well, okay, I'm pointing where I want to go, that's nice, but I'm also setting a big speed brake, which is going to slow me down. And I don't want to go slow, I want to go fast. So what I want to do is adjust the trim of those sails so that I will be pointing in the direction that I want to go, ideally with the rudder fore and aft. That's a key concept to keep in mind. Now, if I imagine that I'm trying to push this ship around, if I push on it, if it's just sitting here and the wind, the forces of the wind are coming on the bow, more on the bow than on the stern, I should say, then that's going to tend to push the bow away from the wind, assuming the wind's coming from this direction. That's going to push the bow of the ship away from the wind. If more of the forces are coming from the stern, that's going to push the bow of the ship into the wind, so-called weather helm. There is some point between the bow and the stern where if the sum of the forces on all these sails adds up to be effectively as if it was pushing in a particular spot, that is known as the center of lateral resistance. And if all these sails are trimmed in such a fashion that the sum of all those forces adds up to pushing at that point, I won't turn downwind or upwind, I'll just drift sideways. That's the center of lateral resistance. You can also add up the sum of the forces on the sails themselves and the way that they're giving you propulsion to come up with where is the center of effort, as it's called. And that allows you to figure out that if the center of effort is forward of the center of lateral resistance, I'm going to be turning downwind. And I can go the other direction if I have the center of effort aft. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, if I am running downwind with all the sails perpendicular to the keel, and as you can see here, the wind is here. I'm doing what's called a running, just running downwind. That's not the fastest thing to do because I've got the mainsail is kind of blanketing the foresail, so I don't get as much propulsion as I might otherwise. If I'm running with the wind perpendicular to the ship, that would be a reach. If I'm pointing a bit downwind from a beam reach, that would be a broad reach. So it's all about balance. If I'm trying to sail as close to the wind as I can manage, that would be a close hauled point of sail. If I start trying to go a little closer to the wind than that, that's when the helmsman's going to start to see those sails start to flutter, to as they say, luff, or in the older terminology, they sometimes refer to that as lifting. Sails are lifting, but more modern sailors typically always call that luffing. You can, if you wish to stop, you can turn the ship beam on to the wind, and you can actually, if you imagine these sails are set, both the fore and the main together, if you choose, you could set them, one of them this way and one of them that way, and they will tend to cancel each other out, and the ship will actually just sit poised, beam onto the wind, and then it will just be pushing sideways. And that sideways is a very, very slow thing to do, of course, because it's not built to go sideways. It's meant to go forward toward the bow through the water. So if you deliberately do that to turn things sideways, you will go very slowly sideways, and that would ordinarily be considered a bug. But actually, if you want to go very slowly, if you would like to stay where you are, for instance, for some kinds of ceremonies, such as burials at sea, for example, you don't want to be moving forward. You want to stop, and that's the most effective way to do that. And that is called heaving to. You heave to and cause the ship to essentially stop in place, or as close as you can get.
Or double weighing downwind.
Yeah, that's another way you could go about it. Yeah, I'm skipping past some things here. People ask, how close to the wind can you sail? In a big square rig or like the Star, the answer is not very close. We can sail, typically we will measure angles not by degrees, but by points, which are eighths of a right angle. And you can sail about 1 point upwind of the beam reach, which is about 11¼ degrees, which is to say, not very close to the true wind. Big square riggers are not built for that. They're built to be trade winds vessels. They're built to sail on the trade winds, and you're typically being very careful to make sure that you're operating the ship in such a way that you can take advantage of wind on the beam or from aft or on the quarter in order to run efficiently. But you don't want to be in a situation where you're having to sail directly upwind. If you're tacking ship, because these ships don't go upwind very well, if you have to, what you can do is, if I want to go that way, I can sail as close to upwind as I can manage this way for a while, and then I can turn the sail that way for a while, and this way for a while, and that way for a while. You can think of it, if you've ever climbed a mountain or a hill, you don't necessarily want to walk straight up the steepest slope. You might want to take switchbacks on a trail and go this way, that way, this way, that way, this way, that way. You can think of tacking as akin to that. There are differences, but that's kind of the idea. There's a whole sequence for tacking the ship, which I'm going to skip past. Wearing ship is when, instead of taking the bow of the ship through the eye of the wind, you take the stern of the ship through the eye of the wind. And in some cases, especially in very high winds, that can be a safer thing to do. When we sail the Star, it's typically an anniversary celebration. And I'm just going to skip past some other things here. And can I say, any questions?
Thanks, David. Can you put on slide 24?
I'm sorry, what?
Can you put it on slide 24 so I can take a picture?
Slide 24. Oh, okay. How am I going to do that?
If possible.
Oh, I'm sure it's possible.
Head on the maple one. Yeah. Too slow with the camera.
Ugh.
One more.
There's California.
Who's just landing right now.
Thank you.
Oh, she's just coming in?
Yeah.
She's been out on an education department sale this morning.
With the little munchkins.
Yeah.
I'll remember that day.
15,000 a year.
There you
A lot
go.
of munchkins.
That's right.
So David, after this, is gonna take everyone onto the Star, and, you know, your previous tour was on the deck and below deck. This is about the rigging and how things are set and work. And so David's gonna answer all of your questions to where at the end of, by 1 o'clock, you can all just sail it right out.
Yeah.
Nothing to it, right, David?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a piece of cake.
Thank you, David.
Very well.
So right now, Saturday is 3:03.